Hi Birdland, welcome back to O's Across the Pond, your European home for all things Baltimore Orioles. I'm Simon, and whether you're listening from London, Lisbon, Loch Ness, we're happy to have you here. And what a week. We're just starting to record this after the final game of the Detroit series. So, yes, we're struggling. We're going to look at some silver linings, hopefully, and we've got some questions to work through as well, both from listeners, our WhatsApp group, and internally amongst ourselves. So tonight we're going to dive headfirst into the Brandon Hyde debate. Is he now seriously in the hot seat? And plus, is Mike Elias's rebuild hitting real turbulence, or are we just impatient fans with short memories? And we'll break down the Nationals and Tigers series, and we'll look ahead to what's next, and of course go through those questions that I've mentioned. So please grab yourself a cuppa, hot on this side of the pond, cold on the other, and we're going to talk baseball European style. And we're delighted this time. Grant and Thomas are here, and we're joined by our guest Andy. And we'd like to kick off first, Andy, by welcoming you, and if you could just give us a bit of background as to your Oriole fandom, that would be great to help us set the scene.
Thank you, and hello everyone. Thanks for inviting me in. Live in Orpington in Kent, on the Kent-London borders, and was brought into the Orioles world by my wife Lisa, who started watching the Orioles when they were back on Channel 5 back in the 1990s. Been lucky enough to go to the US on many occasions and seen coming up to 50 Orioles games over 9 stadiums and 20 at the wonderful Camden Yards. Home, also a football secretary for Hayes and Yeading United, which takes up too much time, and a long-suffering Charlton Athletic fan. So being a season ticket holder until having a few years away, but back doing that. And for my sins, I'm also a qualified football referee and follow my son all over the place as he plays for Bromley in the under-18s. So pretty much sport here, sport there, and sport everywhere.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. We got a really good response from our first episode. So thank you to everyone who's listened and who's given us some feedback and some suggestions. And I know, Grant, you've taken on some of that feedback for us, haven't you?
Yes. Good evening, Simon. Good evening, Andy and Thomas. So people wanted to know a wee bit more about where we were from and where our accents were from. Seemed to be a question that cropped up. So I'll just do that for myself. I'm Grant. I live in Glasgow, up in Scotland. I first got into the Orioles and, in fact, baseball in 2016. I had watched the odd game on Channel 5 during my student years, Andy. And unfortunately, 2016 was when I got into it. It was going to be our last good season for what would be 7 years. Didn't know at the time there was going to be 7 years of pain after watching Machado and Mancini coming up and getting into the playoffs. I've got a toxic Orioles trait is that I don't buy into the hype that prospects get in AAA. I don't believe it until they actually get up into the big leagues and you see them. So I'm sorry, I picked on Dylan Beavers. I will not be reposting a video of you hitting a bases clearing double in a poorly lit stadium and caption it. Call him up as people seem to do on social media almost every Monday morning. So, Thomas, you're going to introduce yourself as well to the podcast world.
Yeah, evening all. Thoroughly enjoyed doing last week's first episode, and as Simon said, we got a great response from everyone who listened in. So, I'm Thomas. I'm from Merseyside. Seems to have a glutton for punishments because I'm also a lifelong Evertonian. Been following Everton home and away for many years now. The O's and Everton are quite similar, really, because they haven't won a title since the 80s. So it's been quite a barren few decades for me following sporting teams. I first fell in love with the Orioles, and in fact, all things Baltimore and Charm City, when I visited there in 2010 whilst on a deployment with the Royal Navy. The Orioles and Ravens are my passion now. I've been over to Camden Yards twice since 2010. The first game there was against the Oakland Athletics, 2010, and we actually won that game 5-1. And I was last at a Ravens game in 2023. So it's the Ravens and Lamar Jackson destroy the Seahawks.
Okay. Simon, you're going to tell us a bit about yourself now as well?
So I now live in the northeast of England, so for anyone familiar with UK sports teams, probably the closest team is Middlesbrough. I'm originally from the northwest. I grew up in North Wales. I am English, and it was a sort of, I suppose, a stereotypical football upbringing. I grew up in a Man United supporting house, and I did dip my toe into the sort of NFL world during the 90s, where they were screening the games, and nominally picked the Bengals as a team. Must be something to do with orange, but it just never quite stuck. And then I defaulted back into football, or soccer for anyone listening over the pond, and I became sort of slowly more disillusioned with this, particularly with top flight football. The type of football played, the possession game, the VAR. So I'm anti robo ump, so please don't come for me online for that. But I just be careful what you wish for out there. And the dive in and the lack of physicality in the game and all the other stuff. And I was just looking for something different. And then one day, a friend of mine just suggested watching baseball. And I, like with a lot of people, I think just one game and I was hooked straight away. I like the pace. I like the fact that it's not hectic, but anything can happen at any moment. And I chose the O's because I wanted someone on the East Coast because of the time zone, to be honest, so I could actually catch as many games as possible. And I didn't want to choose an obvious team to be a sort of glory hunter, and I've definitely not done that. And that's my background, really. And now it's almost at the cost of every other sport. I'm all in. So although we're very much removed from Baltimore, I hope this podcast will sort of demonstrate that the passion of our fandom, even though it's different, is strong, but in different ways to the locals as well. So that's me.
Excellent. Okay, we're now going to go through the pain of recapping the week that we've just watched, which was a 5-1 or a 1-5 week against Washington and Detroit. So I think we're going to bring Andy in to just take some takeaways on the DC series, which was Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
So the DC series, we're normally reasonably good against Washington, but unfortunately we're reasonably bad against them. We got our one win against them, but the main notes from the series that we've seen are the lack of batting. The bats remain exceptionally cold, only 5 runs across the 3 games. And even if our pitching was outstanding, you're not going to win many games if you're only scoring 5 runs across 3 games. There are just so many quiet bats. You've got Mounty, Westy, Adley and Gunner. That none of them are at the races yet. And we've got an unusual situation, if you're a lifelong Orioles fan, as most of us are, that our best bats are actually Ramon Urias and Cedric Mullins. And that has definitely not been the case over the last years. And both were candidates of being unceremoniously dumped at the beginning of the season for trades, but nothing ever happened, and now they're actually doing reasonably well. Povich pitched really well, probably his second best game since he's been with the Orioles, and Sagano continues to be steady. But then you come to Charles Morton, and he's 0-6 now. What we do with him, we'll discuss later, and no doubt it will come up as one of our things to talk about, as to what do you actually do next. Brandon Young will take a while to get assimilated to the rigors of the big league. Picking up on your point, Grant, that AAA is nowhere near where you need to be when you're coming through and playing baseball at the major league level. Dean Kramer blows hot and cold. Sometimes he's good, sometimes he's bad, but he needs the bats to come alive to help him out, because he will give up 3, 4, 5 runs per game. But even with Eflin and Grayson, we've got no chance unless we start putting some bats in. So the key takeaway for me is we've got to get those bats warmed up to give the pitchers a chance to do something.
Yeah, I think I had a few notes as well, Andy, and I would just echo almost everything that you've said about the pitching not being really irrelevant, even with Sagano and Povich having really good outings. it was going to be really difficult to win those games. Fortunately, we did win that third game, but only 2-1. I just collated a couple of stats from Adley and Gunnar in the Nats series, were 3 for 23 with 3 walks, and they were batting basically 2 and 3 or 1 and 2 every night. So that is a big hole in the offense, and it's 2 guys obviously that have been extremely good for us since we've been successful, and it's going to be very difficult unless those 2 guys can turn around. There's certainly been a bit better over the weekend, and these guys are too good to stay down and not work it out and not contribute in some form. But they are really the 2 guys that we need. So we're just going to now talk about the Tiger series, where we've just been swept. Arguably, some encouraging signs. Some of the close games yesterday in the doubleheader. But Thomas, you've got some takeaways from what we've just seen over the weekend.
Yeah, so obviously this series was just being swept against the Tigers. Before I go on to this series, I just want to sort of link back into the National Series and something that I noticed. Just a severe lack of energy. It was in the same game, a couple of innings apart. There was 2 instances, and although it didn't have an effect on the game, it's something that really bothers me when you're watching these talented sports stars as they are, competitors, fighting for places, wins, opportunities. You want to see commitments, and there was an instance in the first inning, Gunnar just wasn't running through onto first, and then the one that really wound me up was Jorge Mateo. The shortstop made a hell of a catch, but Jorge was called out at first on a ground out because the umpire, it didn't look like it was a catch at first. They had to go back to the replay to have a look, and you just see Jorge just stop, and there's just a severe lack of commitment and effort there. As I say, it didn't have an effect on the game, but it's just something that I've noticed creeping in, and they were two scenarios that I've witnessed in that game.
Yeah, I agree. It's a worry, definitely. If they're not got any hustle, then that stems to or leads to deeper problems or suggests deeper problems, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, back to Detroit, I was impressed with Povich the other night. Really impressed with him. It's just bat's not there to back up the pitches, and we've had these discussions in the WhatsApp groups and on watch-alongs about batters backing up the pitches and vice versa. It just doesn't seem to be clicking. I think there was a quote today on the game that if the Orioles didn't have bad luck, they'd have no luck at all at this moment in time. Just some of the stats that I've picked up from obviously the start of the season in relation to the pitching. Eflin 2-1, Morton obviously 0-6, Kramers 2-4, Sagano 3-2, Povich is 2-3, Young is 1-1. I mean, you look at the facts there. We're a 500 team potentially without Morton in the side. The other thing you need to take into account is we were 5-45 with runners in scoring position. We left 39 on base since Sunday. That's what we're up against at the moment in time.
I think that if there is a silver lining, Thomas, that possibly is one that if you take the Morton starts out, we're pretty much close to a 500 team, and that's with a lot of offense going missing. So it probably doesn't take a lot to turn it around, and it doesn't take as much as some people maybe think, but you still need to do it, and you still need to make a decision in Morton, and you still need to find somebody to pitch, reasonably well in those spots, and you possibly need to rely on Brandon Young getting going. That's going to be a big ask if he's going to be an everyday in the rotation as a youngster with little experience. You're not going to guarantee anything there that he's going to last, but hopefully he can at least fill a gap till other guys get back. Okay, so that was what I was going to say about Brandon Young. it does look like he give us something. You know, I think we're going to see him at least until Eflin's back. Hopefully he can stick around and help us out. On the double header, Morton was definitely helped by the opener. Keegan Aiken came in, he did a good job. He got 5 outs, and then Morton came in and got the 6th out in the second inning, and that certainly felt like gave us a platform. It also felt like Morton was further into the game. We actually had a lead when Morton came in to pitch in the third inning, but that was very quickly eliminated in that third inning. If we're going to have the Morton discussion, I really struggle to see how they can let him go another time in the rotation. Although it wasn't as disastrous as it had been, he still only got through three and a third innings, walked 5 batters, gave up 3 runs. Just not good enough. Aiken came in and did his job as the opener, which, all right, it's not always going to work out, but we just can't have that. It's too much to carry the rest of the team, and I think it is the kind of thing that can lead to the rest of the team really not operating, because it's just a kind of collective groan when he's up on the roster. So,
do you know what it reminded me of? Yeah. From a taking a really European perspective on this, it reminded me, when some teams in football let one of the fullbacks take, the goalkeeper doesn't take the goal kicks. It felt a bit like that, and usually it's symptomatic. If you don't trust your goalkeeper to take their own goal kicks, it's usually because they're awful. I don't
mind the opener strategy. It doesn't tend to work that for us, but we've never really stuck with it. It's worked for other teams.
True.
But if you're paying the guy 15 million, you really need him to either do a job or get out. I personally think we've seen the last of Morton starting. I think they'll move him. They'll try and move him to a relief role. I don't think they're going to DFA him just because of the salary issue. I think they'll try and get him as a reliever and just see if they can find something. Obviously, they might do a phantom IL stint for him and just see if he can work out. I don't know how legitimate that is, but I think that's what we'll see happening this week at some point.
I think you're right, Grant, but we haven't really got a long man in the bullpen at all anyway. That's where the opener doesn't really work for us, because we haven't got someone that can eat 2, 3, 4 innings apart from the starters.
True, and as I said, you can have it as an emergency strategy. You don't want to be doing it every week just to kind of manage somebody. So I think that's what we'll see this week with Morton. I think he's probably started his last game, at least for the next few weeks. Whether we see him doing well in relief, he'll definitely get a chance, because they're paying him too much money to just cut him loose, I think, this early in the season.
I suppose we hinted out at the beginning, but looking from from a managerial or a strategic perspective, I suppose the biggest debate when everyone's looking to point fingers and accountability and all the rest of it is how much this lies at Manager Hyde's door. Andy, as our guest, we're keen to understand what your take is on this. It's probably a simple question, but is he to blame, or is he being a scapegoat?
So I think I like Brandon Hyde. I think he was a big upgrade on Buck Showalter at the time. Buck had his day. He had some good times, but things started to get a bit stale. I think he's got to take a great deal of the responsibility, but also no one could have predicted the sheer number of injuries to key players over the first months of this season. To lose your best starting pitchers, your primary right fielder, with Gunnar and Westy missing the beginning of the season, it really hasn't been a good anticipation. It hasn't really been a good time to be the manager of the Orioles. Maybe the change to the hitting coaches has also come along. We saw changes over the winter. Using another football analogy, it takes people time to get used to what people want you to do. And we've seen the changes to Jackson Holiday, who seems to have a much better stance, but others that have been used to doing things for years and years in the way that they do, suddenly to be told to do things a little bit differently, and then it's going to be very difficult. So I really don't think he is being treated like a scapegoat, but as the season progresses, we'll really start to see that work its way out, because what happens next is going to determine the rest of his season. If things get really, really bad, then I can't see him being retained for too much longer, to be fair.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, Andy, at all. I don't think Hyde is to blame, but I also don't think he's the solution to a struggling team that should be doing better. If you think that when Hyde was brought in, he was kind of almost the kind of caretaker to manage the rebuild years, and just there was nobody was going to take that job on that was any experience or was any kind of playoff manager. So he was brought in. I think he did a good job, because it was a hiding to nothing, really, to not to use a pun there, but there was very little chance of us doing a lot, but he did press the buttons when he had them. But I just don't see he's that type of personality that's going to go in and get hold of players and turn things around. I think the players are almost kind of doing their own thing now individually. That's what it feels like. I don't know if that's the case or not. I think I would just add to the end-game strategy. I don't have an issue with the end-game strategy at all. I think it does take the kind of pinch hitting the matchups. It's taken to extremes at times, but ultimately the stats are the stats, and I think he gets more right than he gets wrong. People tend to focus on a decision that's not worked out and try to hang him for it. I think he gets plenty of them right. He presses the buttons, especially with the relievers, and getting the right guys in at the right times to try and get 3 outs from what is often average relievers, to be perfectly honest, in terms of what he's given to work with. And I think it's very underestimated, the buttons he presses and how he does it. I think you more often see managers undermanage a game and leave guys in too long, or just leave their kind of top of the lineup in against the wrong batter, against the wrong pitcher, rather than exploring their options. But certainly as Thomas hinted to earlier, the bigger issue with the team as a whole is the lack of hustle, the lack of focus, sloppy errors, not running hard to first. And that does suggest that there's a bigger malaise, and possibly there's not that many levers to pull apart from a new manager. I don't know if they'll do that. I agree that if it goes right into the end of this season, yes, we will. But at this stage, I don't think they're going to press that panic button. Certainly, Elias and Rubenstein do not strike me as people that press panic buttons. So I think we're going to have Hyde for at least the next few months.
I mean, do you think there's anyone out there, any managers around the leagues that would be a good fit for us? I agree that I don't think they. I think we'll stick with him for the rest of the season. But who's out there?
I mean, there's definitely better managers managing. We wouldn't be able to hire them or tempt them away from other clubs. That again, Andy mentioned Buck Showalter. I think if they were going to make a change and there was a kind of caretaker brought in, if they wanted an experienced guy, that is probably the guy. There's also, I believe, Bruce Bochy and Dusty Baker, but they're kind of retired effectively. So in terms of making a change, it's always the issue that can you get the next appointment right? We've not seen a lot of managerial changes in the Orioles, over the last decade. There's only been 2 guys there. So I just think if we were to make a change, we're more likely to see Elias hire somebody who kind of buys into his strategy with the analytical approach, or somebody that agrees to buy into it to get the job, which is possibly what Hyde did back in 2018 when he was brought in, and he has managed that way. Certainly, it doesn't feel like he's that type of guy that sits in front of a laptop all the time, but that's the way he's managed, and I think it is probably front office driven.
Well, speaking of Mike Elias, Andy, I'm interested here what you think. our trade decisions? Were we too cautious, or was it am I missing something?
It's a very good question, and it's the $1 million question, really. We'd all love to have seen some top of the rotation pitching come to bolster it, especially as we were inevitably going to lose Corbin Burns, because his value was just way above where we would be comfortable in setting. But even Corbin Burns has gone away and is not setting the world alight over at the Diamondbacks. His ERA's over 4. He's 0-1 in 5 games pitched. So we also had Jack Flaherty, for instance, who was, let's face it, pretty awful for us in that last postseason season before last. And he was the next best prospect, older prospect that could come to us. So I think it's a very difficult position because you don't want to overspend. We overspent with Chris Davis, for instance, and we'll be suffering that payroll for several more years yet. Yeah. And we haven't got the sheer number of people coming to the Camden Yards at the moment. You still see that top left-hand corner empty a majority of games with 20, 25,000 people. So the finances have got to also make sense. You don't want to bankrupt yourself. We've seen that enough times in football where you have teams like Leeds United that go out and try and win lots of things and then end up bankrupting themselves. So we've got to be very careful with that.
Yeah.
I just don't think we're well placed at present to encourage people to come to us. We haven't even got our own prospects signed up for many more years, like Adley and Gunnar. And why would they? Because they can make themselves a lot more money somewhere else at the moment.
Yep, definitely. I think the issue I've got with the Elias strategy is he's been very good at just piecing things year to year. He's not, as you say, Andy, he's not committed for any length of time. You know, if we do sign somebody, it's generally been a 1-year deal. With the exception now of O'Neill, who's come over, and we're probably going to have him for 3 years because I would imagine he's going to opt out after this year. But everything else has been a 1 year, and he generally has gone and found what we needed for that 1 year. He got Eflin in a trade, who was basically a year and a half. Again, he's probably going to walk at the end of this year. So it becomes, you give yourself a lot to do every winter to you know, as more and more kind of longer tenured guys move off the roster, you give yourself more to do every winter to replace these guys who are at this point, when by the time Santander leaves, is, you know, 6 years of experience, one of the best power hitters in the league, and you're trying to replace him, you know, with free agents. So it's worked to an extent, but it's certainly not put us over the top in terms of his trade strategy and his free agent strategy.
So do we feel that this team's really built to win now? Then, Grant, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been positive on this and felt that the team is built to win. As we've mentioned, the young talent in the lineup has got a very high ceiling. But at the moment, sitting here on the 27th of April, after we've just gone 1-5, it seems that it's very far away. I always said in the chats that the team this year will live and die on the offense, and I think that's the case. I think if we had a better offense, we would be sniffing around, or if the offense were doing better, because, you know, we've got the guys who we've got, we could survive with kind of average pitching with a high offense. All of the kind of projections that we saw pre-season from the main sites, they were projecting our offense as a top 3 offense, and that was possibly even underestimating the likes of Kjerstad and Holiday, who'd been up and had a couple of cups of coffee, but probably did have higher ceilings than projections might assume, as well as we all know, the platoon advantage that we would have got, or we would hope to have got, from the likes of new signings, O'Neill, Laureano, Sanchez. They were brought in to just face lefty pitching, and although they've faced a lot of lefty pitching, they've not got a lot of hits off them so far. So the pieces are there. It's just there's no secret sauce that's kind of held us together that did in previous years.
And I see a lot of talk online about Rubenstein not spending any money, and we're not investing, and the off season was disappointing and everything else. It reminds me, the first time I ever went to town as a 12-year-old with a bit of pocket money burning a hole in my pocket, I inexplicably went into a stationer's and bought a bumper pack of rubber bands, and I brought them home, and my mum said, "What have you bought them for?" And my answer was, "I have no idea." And she drove me all the way back to town and made me get a refund. And we can't really do that with these players, but
No.
have we dropped the ball with some of these? I mean, it's easy to say with a bit of hindsight, and the season is young and everything else. But
I did a wee bit of just pulling some figures together, because we keep seeing social media. We're permanently in social media looking at Orioles accounts and what people are saying. And everybody was just saying, "Oh, the Orioles aren't spending. This is just the same old, cheapos. They're not taking the right players." But this winter, we've handed out contracts to Charlie Morton for $15 million, Sanchez for $8.5 million, Tyler O'Neill for $16.5 million, probably rising to $49.5 million over 3 years. Mateo got $3.5 million, basically as a glorified pinch runner, unfortunately, although he did get a couple of hits off a Scooble today. Laureano was brought in quite late at $4 million, and then they're the guys that haven't worked out so far, albeit 27th of April. We also picked up Sagano for $13 million, who so far so good. Looks like he's been a really good pickup. And Andrew Kittredge for $10 million. And, that probably was an important piece, because he was probably going to be the guy that was going to kind of account for all this average pitching, and just kind of see the bullpen through in the kind of fifth and sixth innings. He's been injured, unfortunately. So ultimately, that's £70 million on these seven players. It's not a trivial amount of money at all, but it looks like a poor strike rate that you've at the moment. You've got kind of one out of six is worked out as productive, and if you add that to some of the other historical free agent signings that we brought in, I would cite Jordan Lyles, Kyle Gibson 2 years ago, Adam Frazier that year as well. I think it adds up to Mike Elias. Obviously we've seen him as a great draft and develop guy. He's done a great job, I think, with those assignments each year during the draft and getting the right guys and the talent into the organisation. He's also pulled out some good trades, and he's also found absolute diamonds and out of thin air. Albert Suarez being one, Yennier Cano, Ryan Ahern, Aaron Hicks as well at one point came in and played centre field for us. But he just does not have a good spend all the money kind of strategy. That feels like we've got a body of evidence against him now that he spent a lot of money on these guys who were kind of bottom end of the roster type pickups, and they're not working out. So you're spending $8.5 million on a backup catcher. At least get him on base now and again, which unfortunately is not what Sanchez was ever going to be. Just to pick on him, unfortunately. No,
we can't rely. Like Andy said on air just before we came on, you can't rely on getting hit by pitches, can you? To up those stats. It's so Thomas. If this season carries on like it has done so far, and let's hope it doesn't, where does that leave Elias's legacy, do you think, if this season is a complete washout?
I think in my eyes, and there might be a few other Orioles fans out there, there might be a lot. I think his legacy is potentially already starting to be, if not, isn't tatters. We knew the reputation Elias had when he came in. Yes, we have seen some progress. Some of the trades have been good, as Grant alluded to. Some have been questionable in regards to some of the players that we've lost to trade and what they've gone on to look like they're going to achieve. The lack of pitching improvements this year obviously stands out. Again, I know there's injuries, but everybody knew in the organisation and out of the organisation what we needed this year, pitching-wise. A big concern for me is we've gone from number one ranked farm system to number 15. There's questions about extensions, as Andy said earlier. It'd be nice to have some form of like statements of intent with the extensions. But going back to the pitching, we know Elias likes to build pitching depth from the minors. I'd like to use these stats that Camden Chat put out there, just to back up the points I'm trying to make. So since his appointment in the winter of 2019, Elias has overseen 6 drafts with the Orioles. Over those 6 drafts, Elias has made 133 selections, with 63 of them selections being pitchers that we've drafted and signed. However, Orioles 26 picks inside the top 100 selections of the draft, Elias has used exactly 3 of them on pitchers. No pitcher Mike Elias drafted in the top 100 picks of the draft is pitching for an Orioles affiliate. Is that system working? I don't think it is. I would like to see a few more risks taken by Elias and co. Just to sum up the points about his legacy is in tatters. I think it just comes down to what we can salvage this season, and then can we make a change in the off season? I don't think changing the GM now will do any good this season, but I think what we've also need to bear in mind that it was Rubenstein's first off season as an owner with Elias as GM. Obviously, Rubenstein came in last season on the eve of the first game, so there's the argument to be had. Do we need to allow Elias and Rubenstein more time to see what can be done? But again, for me, it just comes down to how does this season end? What can we salvage out of this season? Because if it carries on the way it's going, I think it might have to be a root and branch change.
I think in terms of the draft strategy, I actually don't think that's a big problem. I think that has worked for us, but you do need to buy the pitching. There's no point saying we're going to draft the bats and we're going to buy the pitching, because obviously the pitching does take a lot more development. We just watched Tarek Skubal. He was at an 8th or 9th round pick, so he's obviously found something well after the draft. He wasn't slated top of the board. So there is so much volatility on the pitching that the bat talent does tend to be more, I suppose, programmable in terms of the the spreadsheets. I do agree if Rubenstein is probably thinking about what he's going to do, because as I alluded to earlier, I don't think Elias is the guy that can spend Rubenstein's billions to become a World Series team. He's just not got that in him. He's not that type of manager, that type of front office. So that might be what makes the change. It's not going to happen, certainly not until the end of the season, but it's going to be Rubenstein's decision if he does decide that Elias is not aligning with his way of thinking.
So looking ahead, Andy, what for you does success look like in 2025 now that we're a little way into the season and all that has happened and not happened? What's realistically success look like for you?
And I think this answer is very, very different to the answer I would have given even 3 weeks ago. I think the answer this year for success is that we retain the majority of the team intact and not be fearful of where we are and start trading away all and everyone, because we know that you could get some very decent pitching for Adley, for Gunnar, for Jordan, but you've got to try and resist that temptation and not go on another wholesale rebuild. We've just done that. We've done the rebuild and we've come out the other side. It's not at all working, but we can't do that again. I remember when Machado left, it was the end of the world, and we've taken several years to come out of that Machado deal with what we have now. We need to make sure that we potentially trade some of the other pieces that are valuable to other people. So potentially people like Ryan Mountcastle, Ryan O'Hearn, to try and get some pitching that will give the stability that we need to have so that we can then convince the players like Adley and Gunner and Jordan that they want to stay with us and extend their contracts. So at the moment, I don't think there's a chance in hell of any of those staying with us unless we can prove we mean what we say we want to do, which is to go on and be a playoff team every year and go on and potentially win the World Series. This year, if we can get to 500 at the end of the season, I think where we are now, that could be deemed as a success, because the way things are going at the moment will be well under it.
Yeah, if I could just come in, Andy, I think 500 at the moment, we would all bite your hand off for that. In terms of this season, if it does continue the way it's going, we will definitely see guys traded away. The ones you mentioned, O'Hearn. Don't know if Mountcastle, he's still here next year, but Mullins probably, Eflin, Sagano, anybody that's having any kind of decent season that is not on the books next year will go away. The problem I've got with that is teams do not trade away their best guys for this year's, fillers. So we're not going to get a huge amount back for that. It's something that you need to do because there's no point keeping these guys on the roster if the season's a bust. But you've got to be realistic and say you're not going to get the best guys. The most you can hope for, is a kind of Yenny or Cano type that maybe comes good. I don't think you're going to get. You should hopefully get some pitching prospects, but not anybody that's going to be ready to go next year. So that is a realistic thing, that next year we're still going to have these problems. We're going to be 3 or 4 more players down that we'll need to find a way to find. Because other thing, looking at the bigger picture, it's actually quite unusual for teams to make the playoffs 3 seasons in a row. And it's not that uncommon for teams to have a year off and then come back the following year. So even if this season does look like it's going the way it's going, and we get too many problems that they're not solvable, then I don't think, I'm certainly not going to lose faith that next year is going to be just as bad or worse, or that we're going to be into full rebuild mode. We'll still have Adley, Gunner, Westberg. We'll still have these guys, Cowser as a core. We'll have Holiday. We'll have Kjerstad. We'll have possibly Basal at that point up. We'll possibly have Bradfield as well, if he can recover from his injury. So there is still positives there, but we just need to be realistic about what a bad season can give us in terms of recruitment. That we're still going to have a lot of work to do in the winter.
So Thomas, let me give you a magic wand.
Oh.
Your general manager tomorrow, what's the first bold move you'd make?
Taking into account what Andy and Grant have said, and I understand the situation with the trades, but I would be looking at possibly making a trade to try and get some pitching in. Said he'd probably be on the block for me, as much as it saddens me and probably most Orioles fans, the love affair that we have with Cedric Mullins. Grant said obviously Mountcastle's there next year. I did write down in my notes possibly Mayo. I don't think that's what we're going to do. Grant, we spoke about that before we came on air to record. What a trade would look like, I don't know, but is there assets there? There's 2 or 3 that could be used. And then the other 2, I'd also DFA Morton and send them out to retirement, because look, the experiment hasn't worked. And Jorge Mateo, $3.5 million for essentially a pinch runner. I know he had 2 hits today off Scuba, stole 2 bases. I'd also DFA him. I mean, saying that, I am just a fan, and a few of those shots have just made a while. I'll probably never ever be a GM. Grant would probably have more of an idea of what a trade would look like, or what he would do.
Yeah, I mean, I think Mateo, I think you're right on that. I think that has run its course. I think we've massively overpaid for somebody to be a pinch runner and a defender. He's not going to be a consistent hitter to get him in the lineup. I would certainly be at the point, again, I don't think they'll do this, but I would certainly at the point where I would just call Mayo up and DFA Mateo. There's other shortstop options in Triple A if you need somebody for an injury. So you don't need Mateo there as injury cover. So that's certainly an easy one. It's not going to be a game changer. We've had a look at Mayo. He's struggled in the big leagues. I'm sure he will come good. He will be productive in some form. But it's not stuck so far. We will need to get a look at him this season, because even if we manage to turn it around and win some games, there's still going to be room in the roster for him at some point in the season to get a look at him.
Okay, so we'll move on a little bit from some of the doom and gloom. We've tried to remain as positive as we can, but we're being factual and realistic as well. But I've got a bit of a fun question to ask, and I'm going to ask this in a slightly different way, if that's okay. We've had a question from someone who's called Larold online, and I think we've answered. He's given us two questions. I think we've answered the first one, which is he said, "How did you all become O's fans being in the EU?" Well, we're not going to go anywhere near whether we're in the EU or not, because the four of us are in the UK. So let's not open that can of worms. But European-wise, and we've sort of covered that off in our intros, when Grant sort of highlighted that from a bit of feedback elsewhere. The other question, though, I'd like to. He's asked us if you were to compare the O's to a EPL team, who would we compare them with? But I'm going to do that. I'm going to ask a slightly different question, because we've got Grant in Scotland, and Andy is repping the slightly lower leagues. So whilst they think of that, I'll start with you, Thomas. If you were to compare the O's to a Premier League team, who would you choose?
I take absolutely no pleasure in this answer I'm going to give. It was discussed the other night in the WhatsApp group. For me, unfortunately, it's the other love of my life, Everton. Both teams have struggled in recent years financially. Everton were on the brink for a couple of years. Everton haven't won a league title since '85. European Cup in '85. I've won a league title since the '80s, like the O's. And I find part of my love affair with Baltimore is it felt like a home from home, a very similar city, massive kind of dockyard area, a city that has been down in the dumps, but a city that has got a lot of charm, and the locals and the people of Baltimore, every time I've been there, have been extremely welcoming, and it is truly one of my favourite cities. But yeah, the only team that the Orioles compare to in the English Premier League is Everton.
Okay, I wouldn't disagree with you there, Thomas, at all.
And Andy, from those of you maybe listening from over the pond who aren't familiar with the UK football pyramid, you're probably familiar with relegation and promotion, and thank God there isn't relegation over the years for the O's, no doubt. But Andy, you mentioned Charlton Athletic, the sort of football love of your life. They've been in the Premier League and are struggling a little bit now. But in the lower leagues, or maybe in Charlton's division, is there a comparable team, do you think?
I think it's very difficult to put it in, because we, as you say, we have got the promotion and relegation. Charlton themselves are one of those teams that they did things really well in the late 90s, early 2000s. They were the team that everyone, and I say everyone, would love to have been, because they came out of adversity. They lost their ground in the late mid-80s. So everyone quite liked Charlton as a second team. And I think a lot of people may see the Orioles as a second team, because they're inoffensive. They've got the best fans in baseball, as we're told every time we go to Camden Yards. But they never quite make it. Charlton won the FA Cup once back in 1947. The Orioles have won the World Series on several occasions, the latest being '83. But ever since, they've been struggling to try and look after their big neighbours. So Charlton have got many neighbours, Arsenal, Tottenham, in the London area, and Baltimore. it was always disheartening going to Camden Yards when we were playing the Yankees or the Red Sox, and actually having more Red Sox or Yankees fans there than there were Orioles fans. And that was a bit like Charlton. Charlton had the number of people, but they were always, it's only little old Charlton, and it's really only the little old Orioles. So in our lives, I think that's why we pick on these teams. I won't go on to my American football team because that's the complete opposite, because that's the Dallas Cowboys, and that's something totally different. But
no, Andy.
Exactly. So I don't talk about that too, but I do enjoy watching the Dallas Cowboys, and they're now the team that just never do anything. They always flatter a bit, but never ever get there.
Thank you. And Grant, from north of the border in Scotland, how would you compare a Scottish team to the Orioles?
I think I've had just a quick think while the other two were answering, and I think I would need to go with Aberdeen up here. And Aberdeen were very good in the 70s and 80s, much like the Orioles were. They were certainly a national team at that stage. They were a competitive team on the European stage, and they actually, even other people in the podcast here might not know, they actually won the European Cup Winners' Cup in 1983, beating Real Madrid in the final in Gothenburg, which is still one of the most famous nights ever in Scottish football. So again, that matches up very, very sweetly with the Orioles 1983 World Series or last World Series win. So yeah, I think I would need to say, not dissimilar again to Merseyside with the industrial in the dock. It matches up perfectly. In fact, Aberdeen, although I'm not an Aberdeen fan, but it does fit the criteria definitely.
Thank you. Well, Larold, in Delaware, I believe. I hope we've sort of answered your question there. It was fun for us to have a think about that. We also wanted to give a shout out to Jeffrey, who found us on Reddit and is now already a very active part of the WhatsApp community we have here, the European Orioles WhatsApp group. So if you're interested in that, get in touch with us and we can add you. One bit of feedback we got was that, we had a lot of feedback on our accents. That was something straight away. So we can't do a lot about those, but hopefully it adds a little bit of flavour. And we will have other guests from different parts of Europe as well with different accents going forward. So bear with us. We can't really supply subtitles. But one thing was that we used a few words that maybe people have to Google, and that's fine. But and this is probably one that's quite fitting. And this is I believe this might be of Scottish origin.
I think so.
And Grant, I don't know if you can give us this one. You can educate some of our listeners from across the pond.
Well, the word in the notes is gubbed, which would just basically mean if you were slapped in the face or punched in the face, you'd have been gubbed, and that'd be you out. So it does feel very appropriate, given that what we've just watched for the last week and a half or so of baseball.
Yeah, we've been gubbed on a lot of occasions so far this season, unfortunately, and let's hope the gubbings come to an end soon. But I think also, Thomas, you had some information, I think, on where maybe some of the listeners are from. So we look to build our listenership. Where are people at the moment?
Yeah, so we had an account on X who messaged in called Valley Individual. He gave us a listen and a download from Virginia. We've had listeners from Delaware, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Florida, and of course the home of the Orioles, Maryland. So a massive thanks for the support. Again, across Europe, we had listeners in Serbia, Ireland, obviously England, Scotland, and Wales. So yeah, if we appreciate the support. We understand that there's a podcast starting off, there's a work in progress. We took on feedback, obviously audio, that we'll continue to work on. And as we grow, there will be opportunities for us to improve, get more content out there. But yeah, just a massive thanks for the support, and just keep liking, following, and subscribing to all the episodes and all the social media accounts to keep up what's coming up on O's Across the Pond.
Absolutely.
Excellent. You can email us at europeanorioles@gmail.com. And as Thomas said, there's an X account, there's a TikTok. So please take a look on there as well. Want to thank Andy for joining us. Hopefully it's been a bit of fun for you. It's good to get your insight.
Absolutely a pleasure. And let's get this podcast going from strength to strength so that we can have more interesting people on, much more interesting than me.
Oh, no, don't do yourself down.
From all over the country.
Oh, we appreciated your time. We've got in between now and recording the next episode, we've got series with the Yankees and Royals. So I would suggest that everyone braces themselves as we remain hopeful. And one thing we do, maybe this can be a bit of a tradition, even on episode 2. We like to end on a positive. So Grant, would you like to go first?
Well, my only positive is that at the moment we're playing the Royals next Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and at the moment they are also below 500. So we might have a slight chance. We certainly have seemed to catch a lot of teams reasonably hot, although I don't think you can say that for the Nationals. So maybe there's a chink of light if we can somehow get through the Yankees series, that we'll have a team that's in similar struggles as us next weekend to have a game with.
Okay, so I like it. Someone else's misfortune, we can align with it and treat it as a positive. Andy?
So we always, over the last couple of seasons, do well against the Yankees. We've got potentially Kyle Gibson coming into pitch on Wednesday. That was mentioned on the broadcast today. That can only be a positive because he is a frontline pitcher for us. So if the bats can warm up and the Yankees can do Yankee things, hopefully we can come away with at least getting 1 or 2 wins this week. So we're not talking next week about a 1-5.
Excellent. Thomas?
Really looking forward to the Yankees series. It's always good to play the Yankees. As Andy said, hopefully they do Yankees things. Obviously, you look at, I've mentioned a few times about Aaron Judge this year, and might have been quoted in the WhatsApp group saying that his start to the season this year is incomparable to other sporting greats. Is probably Michael Jordan for the '94 Bulls. Is how good Aaron Judge has been at this moment in time. But yeah, as he always seems to do well against the Yankees, hopefully they turn up, do Yankees things. And the positive for me with the O's at the moment, Heston Kjerstad and Ramon Urias. They're the positives.
Okay, thank you. Well, mine is that in the last couple of seasons, we've tended to have pretty decent, if not excellent, Aprils, and then September's, sort of August, September, have been less than ideal. I'm hoping it's some kind of weird sort of inverted leap year type thing where it's all backwards for some reason and the opposite is going to be true. And I appreciate I'm clutching at straws there, but I think I'm going to mention O'Hearn again as well, because I just think he just keeps doing it, and thank God someone is. So that's mine. But well, thank you everyone for listening. We've enjoyed it again. So until next time, cheers from across the pond.
Thanks all.
Cheers. Thanks all.
Cheers. Thanks, Phil.